Good morning or good afternoon. Hi, my name is Paul Watkiss, and I am going to talk a little bit about evaluation and governance. And this is my presentation to the 3 Degrees of Global Warming Conference. So I'm going to talk mostly about national adaptation. In the UK, we have a really advanced governance architecture on adaptation, formalised through the 2008 Climate Act, with statutory requirements for climate change risk assessments and national adaptation programmes. And we're into the third cycle now, so that gives us a lot of information and evaluation expertise to draw upon. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about the governance and evaluation lessons from that decade of climate risk assessments and national adaptation programs, and what lessons that might provide us for looking towards 3 degrees. Okay, this is the overall architecture. So top left, we have a CCRA every 5 years. That feeds through to a national adaptation programme, again on the same 5-year cycle. And across the bottom, there's a whole range of activities that the Committee on Climate Change undertake, which effectively do progress reports on government adaptation progress. So they sort of keep the government to account and take stock of where things are going. So 10 years in, obviously the first question is, how are we doing? And I think we can get a pretty good sense from the latest CCC progress report, which came out last year. Even though the right things seem to be in place for a decade, even after 2 cycles and going into the third, something's not really working on adaptation. The CCC report, which is focused on England, highlights that we're not prepared for even a 2 degrees rise, let alone more, and only a handful of sectors have plans that probably don't go far enough in terms of longer or more severe climate change. So that leads to the question of why this is. And I want to just go through a couple of areas to explore that. The first one is in terms of CCRAs. So we've got this trajectory from CCRA 1 to 2 to 3. And this table maps out many of the differences between those 3 in terms of the methodological approaches and some of the things in terms of evaluations that were undertaken and governance. I just want to highlight a few of those as I go on to the next slide. So lots of positives. We've moved over time from a very classic impact-based approach to something that is much more focused on adaptation, informing adaptation, giving urgency, drawing on a much wider range of expert inputs using a synthesis approach, and as well as some new analysis. More steps to sort of build on institutional memory. But if we're honest, we knew all of these things 15 years ago. The academic literature and the CCRA scoping report was very clear about this would be the way to do it. And it's taken a little bit of time, and it does actually highlight an interesting issue of translating academic theory into government practice, and that takes time. And that's something I think we need to bear in mind for the next transition that we're going to go through towards more transformational adaptation. At the same time, there's always a couple of negatives. CCRA 1 had a lot of funding, and that hasn't been as high in subsequent CCRAs, and perhaps CCRA 3 would have been the time to sort of step up. Although there is some evaluation, both academic and formal, from independent organisations, including CCC, much more on CCRA 1 than CCRA 2. We sort of missed a trick after CCRA 2, and certainly going forward there's a better or a greater emphasis to review, evaluate and learn. And a few changes in governance. Not least CCRA 1, as set out in the Act, DEFRA commissioned the CCRA 1 and the evidence review. But in 2 and 3, that role has been passed across to the CCC. And that does lead to a little bit of circular reasoning, because CCC is meant to scrutinise government. There's a way it sort of works, but at the same time, I do wonder if that scrutiny role is sort of changed as part of the governance system. Okay, so the CCRA is developing and producing information on risks. I think most people consider that it's doing a good job, particularly within the resources that it's got. So clearly the issue is slightly further down the chain in terms of delivering adaptation. So we can look at this and look at some of the governance and evaluation issues here. So in the UK, the way that we do adaptation in government is to use a mainstreaming modality. What does that mean? Well, it means we integrate climate change into existing policies rather than having standalone programs or policies or projects. So all of adaptation isn't run out of DEFRA, it's meant to be run out of every government department with a relevant mandate. There's many benefits of mainstreaming. It's undertaken by those who have the responsibility and the expertise. They can integrate it alongside and ensure consistency with other priorities, and there's opportunities for leveraging and scaling up. So that's all really positive. But of course, there's some downsides, and the downsides are mainstreaming is a lot more difficult. You need capacity, and that's got to go right across government. There's quite often more noise, more cross-competing priorities that push adaptation down the list. And of course, there's lots more actors. So the governance becomes really important as soon as you go to a mainstreaming approach. Now, this is something that I've done with a few others, and it's a bit of fun in some respects. But we looked around the world and saw which countries were really reported as being the leaders on mainstreaming. And when you do that and you check back, you can then start to identify a number of success factors that are associated with good mainstreaming. And this is the top 6, or at least from the various studies that I've been involved in. High-level champions and strong ministries, and that's normally ministries of finance or the treasury. Identification of entry points and good windows of opportunity with revisions or new opportunities to integrate. Having the right governance in place as well as the capacity. Finance, clearly, the marginal finance to actually deliver mainstreaming. And then the policy frameworks and the mechanisms across government, as well as the information and tools to support. So those are the things that we're looking for. And we're doing a sort of a little bit of fun, just looked at the UK government and looked at mainstreaming over the last decade and tried to sort of do a very informal mapping of that. And this is what you get. So we've got the number of success factors in place along the left, and then across left to right, we have the time axis. And if we go back to 2008, just before CCRA 1, all of those 6 factors were in place. So in terms of right from the governance through to the finance, right through to the sort of the high-level buy-in, pretty much all the successful factors for doing this were there. There were cross-departmental working groups as well as department plans on adaptation. And then, we go into a really big change. First financial crash, and then change of government, and then some changes in governance. And what we start to see is very rapidly those 6 success factors falling away. And so even by the time we're producing CCRA 1, that's starting to happen. By the time the economics of climate resilience comes up, the landscape's really changed. And by the time we get to NAP 1, the National Adaptation Programme, we really see a low ambition. And that's really translated through in that document. To give you a sense of the change, the Secretary of State at the time was Lord Patterson, and I think fairly clear on the record that he's not the greatest climate advocate. And it's an old saying, but you don't adapt to something that you don't believe in. And you can certainly see that if you read the forward to the first NAP. So we have a sort of a low ambition that's come out because we've not got that governance and those success factors lined up. And then, things start to pick up. So there's a couple of years where there were some really big climate events, starting to see some new entry points emerging, starting to get a little bit more positivity. And then, of course, we have Brexit. And what that really did was it reduced the governance policy bandwidth. So there's just no appetite for additional issues to try and consider. And all the entry points go because policy sort of got stuck. So you start to see again the success factors move away just as we go into CCRA 2, and that really reflects in the NAP 2. So although the NAP 2 has progress from NAP 1, if you read the CCC 2019 progress report, you can see that perhaps the ambition is again really quite low, and that we haven't seen the step change that we might have anticipated 5 years on. Where does that leave us now? On the right-hand side, well, we have a really interesting set of different pathways. And of course, climate change is about uncertainty. But we've got the COP, which is a real driver of positive change and could be really instrumental in the UK raising its ambition. At the same time, everything else from COVID to Brexit seems to suggest that a lot of those success factors will start to, again, be eroded away as we start to get into more complex policy landscapes. Another sort of similar bit of work that was related that I was involved with for CCC tried to ask the question from a different perspective. So it tried to say, well, if government is focused on other issues, non-climate government outcomes, how much will climate change affect those, and has adaptation started to be incorporated in the delivery of those other outcomes? the answer is not really very much. There's always some positive examples, but perhaps less than we might have expected. And I think the other thing that comes through very clearly when you start to do this is there's a lack of defined government adaptation objectives. Of course, adaptation is much more difficult than mitigation. It's much more difficult to set the equivalent of a net zero, much more difficult to set sector targets. But we don't see a clear either objective or theory of change on what and how the government's going to deliver on adaptation towards a longer term goal. And we don't see that either in terms of primary adaptation, and we don't see it in terms of other outcomes and how climate change will affect them. And in some ways, I suppose that really comes through very strongly in the 25-year environment plan. And for me, this was the big opportunity in the environmental domain to really do this differently. So 25 years from 2018 is 2043. By the time we get to 2043, there'll be no doubt we will be living in a very different world, even if it's only 2 or 2.5 degrees. And what we might have expected that 25-year environment plan to do is to really set that longer term ambition and actually help link up the sort of short-term planning with the longer-term vision and aspirations. So that was the opportunity. Did the government grasp it? I guess probably not, is the honest answer. And again, what we see is in many cases, there's not a clear objective on what the government wants to achieve on adaptation. Quite often, although there's lots of positive statements, they're not backed up by particularly strong definitions. So whilst the document might talk about resilience, it doesn't actually define what resilience is or what targets specifically it is setting on resilience to achieve. And I think it dodged many of the big issues. There's some really large issues facing the UK. What are we going to do on coastal areas? Are we going to protect? Are we going to let them go? We're going to transfer risks between groups in society, but that wasn't really there. And to some extent, it's easier not to put those in, but it's a bit of a shame. And we often see this interdepartmentally, this lack of coherence. And a good example is Environment 25-year plan talks about the opportunity from Brexit to develop fisheries, but that and also the fisheries bill that's going through at the moment hardly has any consideration of climate change. You just wonder to some extent why that isn't being communicated across government, even within departments, as well as between departments. And a lot of this does come down to governance. That said, we should always look for some positives, and some really positive noises coming out of DEFRA at the moment, trying to think about 2050 adaptation, resilience, aspirations, and some of those things sound really, really encouraging. I guess the only problem that we're going to have is this landscape that we're in at the moment is going to make those much more challenging. I'm going to have at least one proper slide on governance. There are well-established approaches for understanding governance issues. There's a whole range of social network analysis that's really useful and has been applied quite frequently in the literature. A couple of examples on the right-hand side, and this just isn't really on the radar in CCRA. So we sort of do this very, very quickly, but I think across government, there's not perhaps this approach for actually recognizing that governance is an issue, and that in order to effectively adapt, you need good governance, and you have to be able to map that and look to see what's happening. So there's a bit of a gap there. And that can be very important because quite often, and this example shown on the right-hand side, things such as heat risks involve very different actors from different domains coming together to solve a long-term problem. And the other thing that's related to this is in terms of adaptive capacity. So building the adaptive capacity across different parts of organizations. And again, this was something that we did push quite hard in CCRA 1. And that was looking at both organizational and structural adaptive capacity. And it's sort of gone down the agenda. And I don't really know why, but I think it's a real gap. So we're not even measuring adaptive capacity in government. And if we're not measuring it, then we certainly aren't doing it very effectively, or not doing it in a coherent way. And finally, what do we think going forwards? Well, if we are going to get to +3 degrees, we're going to need more than incremental adaptation. Doing a lot of work on transformational adaptation at the moment. I mean, it to some extent is whatever you want it to be, but there's some nice things coming out in the literature, and there's some sort of reinforcing actions that seem to be associated with transformational adaptation. The fact you need a system level approach, you definitely need to change the governance, and that's not just the existing governance, it's the way that perhaps society makes decisions and the participation of different groups. And there's a change in the scale and the approach of adaptation needed. And I think what's really important here is, in the same way in going from that academic literature in the 2000s and trying to translate that into government policy, that was challenging. I think there's no doubt that trying to get a transformational agenda and to translate that through into government policy making is also going to be incredibly challenging. So where does that leave us? Well, a couple of conclusions. Why aren't we on track to be adapted to 3 degrees? I suppose that's the headline question. And evaluation provides us some lessons, and also it gives us some useful tips for going forward. And many of those have a governance angle. I suppose the starting point is we really do need to invest properly in CCRA again, especially for CCRA 4 and the supporting information for the NAP. And that's something that, you know, as we get into the 2020s, we're really going to have to take a more serious approach and devote more resources to understanding the problem. And a big part of that is going to be understanding the governance. There's no doubt about it that both in terms of cross-departmental and something that I haven't really been able to do justice to here at all, going from national down to local. And that's where there's going to be a huge need for a whole range of adaptation and a very large number of adaptation governance issues. We also need to have a stronger view, analysis, implementation of how to deliver adaptation. Now, we need to move to a situation where there are clear objectives and there's a better mapping of the change that we are trying to achieve, because that's not really there at the moment, and it is challenging, but without that, it's difficult to see how we can really progress things and move even along the incremental level. We have a whole range of levers that we know are important for doing adaptation and delivering, and at the moment we don't have those. We're just in a bit of a dip again, and we need to build those back up. And if we don't build those back up, we'll continue to be in the same place when it comes to NAP 3 and beyond. So there's a clear need to look at what are the successful drivers of adaptation, and trying to make sure that we deliver those so that we can then not just deliver but enable adaptation at scale. And the final thing to end is that we need to go beyond that to hit 3 degrees. We need to realize that mainstream alone won't deliver 2.5 or 3 degrees worlds of adaptation. In fact, mainstreaming itself may be a barrier to transformational adaptation, or to adaptation in general, and will require transformational adaptation to get over it. I mean, we just may need to recognize that we need to do things very differently as climate change becomes more and more of a primary problem. And so I think we just need to start thinking a bit more about the transformational adaptation side, and thinking in terms of both governance and also in terms of setting up the evaluation and learning to actually allow us to try and start that journey along more transformational adaptation. And with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.